All right, what's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to be doing an updated review on the Gearbox Pro Power Elongated. This is pretty much just going to be a video of me talking about my experience with this paddle because I haven't been using it as my primary paddle in a minute. And there's several reasons for that. And it's not because the paddle isn't good, but there is a lot of things that have happened since this paddle came out that I think is important to talk about. And I wanted to wait to make this video to make sure I had as many of the facts right as possible because there's been a ton of rumors floating around about this paddle and no one really knew what was going on, but I feel like now that more time has passed, we have a more clear picture. So the first thing I want to talk about is what happened when this paddle released. So I got mine probably about a month before my review, and it was pretty much the only paddle that I used leading up to that moment. Now, when this paddle came out, unanimously across the board, it got rave reviews from pretty much everyone. And the main thing that everyone talked about was how ridiculously powerful this thing is. Now, when people started getting their paddles, there were a lot of consumers that were like, this paddle does not hit anywhere near as hard as the reviewers. Did reviewers get juiced paddles? Are the reviewers lying? Yada, yada, yada. So in my Discord, this went on for quite some time. People were trying to figure out what on earth was going on. And I wouldn't say until about a month after release where we started having a slightly better idea. And the biggest thing that we figured out was that this paddle changes the more you use it. So a lot of times when you get a brand new one, it still hits hard, but not as hard as a lot of the reviewers were describing. And this has even been confirmed by Raphael at Gearbox. He's stated to me personally, and I believe in various places online, that this paddle does have a break-in period. Now, the problem with this break-in period is it's very undefined. I think I've heard someone at Gearbox say around 1,000 balls and the paddle should be broken in. However, in my experience, I don't think that's actually the case. I've probably hit about 15 different versions of this Pro Power from different people, from different levels, with different hitting experience. And I found that some people play with the paddle for far more than 1,000 hits, and they don't feel that it has broken in or gotten the power levels that it has. While on the other hand, I was hitting with a D1 college tennis player back in December. He had a brand new one right out of the box, and within a day, his was already starting to hit like mine that had been used for several months. But he could also hit the absolute crap out of the ball. So breaking it in was not very difficult because it was hitting it very hard. So this break-in period that you've probably heard a lot of people talk about, it's hard to say how long it'll take. If you're someone who drops the ball, resets, and likes to dink, and you just don't have a very big drive or overhead, or those just aren't shots you hit very often, it's probably going to take longer. Everything that I have seen is that this paddle breaks in faster the harder you can hit it. In fact, when this was happening and people were like, oh, did Chris get a juiced paddle or any of the other reviewers, I actually went out and bought 2 of my own Pro Power Elongated with my own money. I went and sourced them myself, and they definitely hit different than the one I had. Now, however, what I'm going to say is one of them I started using quite a bit to break it in, and it started turning into this. And the biggest things that I have found as the paddle starts to break in is usually the pitch of the paddle changes a bit, how the ball sounds off the paddle, and it's just very clear that it starts to loosen up and hit harder and harder the more you use it. I have one that's completely brand new, and then I have a second one that I would say is maybe like 50% broken in. It's not far off of this one, but it's also not quite there yet. And that Pro Power that I was using, the one that's about half broken in, probably has about 5 to 7 hours on it. I'm sure if I used it for about a week straight, it would pretty much be where this one is now. So from my own experience, I can confirm that this break-in period is real. I know people talk about break-in periods on a lot of different paddles, but generally speaking, I don't think it's as big of a thing with most other paddles. But with this Gearbox, it is absolutely a thing. I have seen so many of these now, and if you compare one that is super, super well used, I promise you, it is not the same as a brand new one. Now, another thing when this paddle came out that was going through my Discord is a lot of people thought the weight impacted how hard it was going to hit. And in my experience so far, that doesn't seem to be the case. The 2 brand new ones that I have were both 7.7 ounces, and I've seen a bunch of other ones ranging from different weights, and that seems to have no impact on the performance. I just think when people were initially getting them and they weren't hitting as hard, they thought it was related to the weight because the break-in period takes time to happen. So no one really knew that that was what needed to happen for it to hit harder. So as far as weights go, I don't think that's extremely relevant to how hard this paddle is going to hit. Now, of course, if you got an absolute anomaly, if you got one that was like 7.3 ounces, that's probably going to make a difference compared to 8 ounces. But generally speaking, if you were in the 7.7 to 8 ounce range, you should be fine. Now, another phenomenon that has actually been very interesting to observe with this paddle is everyone who gets a brand new one, they always go, wow, this paddle's really easy to drop with, which is actually something that I felt when I got my paddle for review. I didn't think it was hard to reset or drop with. And I believe even in my review, I said that with enough time, you should be able to get used to it. It's not the easiest paddle in the world to control, but it's also not as hard as you would expect. And my paddle, since that review, I feel like has loosened up even just a bit further. And now it's definitely harder to reset. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I've not been able to use it for competitive play as much, is because if I get into a game where someone can handle the pace and I have to hit a lot of resets, it's not that I can't do it, but it's a lot harder and I have to be significantly more focused in order to do it well. So what I found is days that you're on with the Gearbox, you are really on. Like you are playing some of the best pickleball you've ever played, but then days where you're just a little bit off, it's really bad. Whereas other paddles similar to like a double black diamond or the Huarache X, or even just a number of other thermoformed paddles, you have more margin of error to play with. If you make a mistake, you might not get punished as bad for it. Whereas on the Gearbox, I found I was getting punished very hard when I was having an off day. So just know that if you buy one of these, you probably are going to find that it's very easy to reset, drop, and dink with out of the box, but as you use it more and it hits its full break-in potential, that is probably going to change. And this is also very apparent to me because I cannot tell you how many friends have used my Gearboxes. In fact, one of them started using my Pro Power Fusion and he loved it. He thought it was the best paddle he's ever used. He was going to buy one, and within about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, he came back and he was like, dude, I just can't reset with it anymore. Like it's just too hard to use. And he was absolutely in love with this paddle. Like he was dead sold on it, absolutely loved it. And then he decided to put it down because he just couldn't use it in high level competitive play anymore. So I do feel like a lot of times with this Gearbox Pro Power, there is this honeymoon phase where you're like, wow, world's best paddle. And then eventually it breaks in and reality kind of hits you. And it's like, oh man, this is not as easy as I thought it was to use. So just be aware that that could happen to you. Now, one other thing I've heard about this paddle, but haven't experienced myself yet, is some people have claimed that the paddle went dead and it doesn't hit as hard anymore. To be honest, I can't confirm this. I've heard it a few times here and there, but I have yet to see a Gearbox Pro Power where I hit it and went, oh, yep, that doesn't have power anymore. Every single time I pick one up, I pretty much know what I'm gonna get. So I don't know about that one. You might see that one floating around online, but I haven't experienced it myself. And like I said, I've probably hit 15 different versions of this Pro Power. Okay, so that's everything to do with the power of the paddle. There's clearly a break-in period. It will hit harder at some point. But now I want to talk about the durability, because this is another reason that I started to stop using the paddle as much. So it's very important to me that when reviewing a paddle or explaining to you guys that you have all of the necessary information to make a proper purchase. So Gearbox has always been known for the best durability in pickleball. In fact, it's not even been close. Their old Gearboxes were just absolute tanks. However, I can't say the same thing about the Pro Power. I'll pop up pictures on screen that you can see now, but there's a lot of people who managed to crack the edges and then foam started coming out, or they hit it and there's a big bulge in the paddle from all the pressure that's inside of it with all the various foam. And this was not an uncommon thing. In fact, the amount of these images that I was seeing within the first 2 to 3 months of this paddle coming out was more than I've ever seen for any other paddle on the market. And that's including brands like Yola, who have traditionally had pretty poor QC. Now, initially, Gearbox was saying, oh, this is just a small amount of claims, there's nothing to worry about. But that's also very familiar to what a lot of the thermoformed companies said when core crushing started happening. All of them said, this is an extremely low percentage of sales, it's hardly impacting anyone, no one needs to worry about this. And then guess what? The entire last year has been spent on companies trying to fix this issue. And even to this day, some companies are still having pretty bad core crushing issues. So when a company tells me it's a very minor percent of sales, but online I'm seeing more than I've ever seen for any other brand, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty skeptical. Now, of course, you may just have a few very vocal, angry customers. I'm aware that that is a very real thing, but at least with the experience in core crushing, it's just never as small as companies make it out to be. So this is something that's never happened with Gearbox. I've hardly ever seen one of these broken. I've maybe seen a handful, but with the Pro Powers, there was a lot of issues with the edges. And even people in my area, you know, they would clank paddles on an overhead, come over and show me their paddle, and boom, it was busting out the sides of the paddle. So I had actually started using protective edge tape on my Gearbox Pro Power. I was just using the Pickleball Effect edge tape, and I highly recommend that if you're going to use a Gearbox Pro Power, that you put some on your paddle, because the edges just seem far too easy to break relative to a lot of other pickleball paddles. And mine hasn't had any issues with the edge blowing up since I've had this paddle, and I wouldn't exactly say that I've been gentle with it. I'm not smashing the paddle, but I'm also not trying to baby the thing and make sure that it doesn't crack. Now, on that same note, another issue that I will say this was more of a minor issue, but I did see it out and about, was the paddle face bulging out. And what it appeared to be was foam expanding too much and causing too much pressure and pushing the face up. I saw a few of these myself, but not nearly as many as the cracked edges or a lot of other things with this paddle. So yes, that's definitely a real thing. I've seen it myself. I've also talked to Raphael, and he said since this paddle has launched, he's made several trips over to Asia, and they have made adjustments to their production line to make sure that this is no longer an issue. He explained what he did to fix it. I don't know if I'm actually allowed to share that with you. I haven't heard of any of these bulging issues happen since that has been explained to me. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but Raphael was pretty confident that that wasn't going to be an issue anymore. So I don't know about that one for sure. I've seen it. It didn't necessarily seem to impact performance, but when you're spending $275, you should be getting a pristine paddle and not one that has bulges in it. One thing I forgot to mention while I was recording this video is the one credit I will give Gearbox is they seem to pretty much warranty almost anything. I've seen a lot of warranty claims inside of my Discord, and I don't think I've heard of one being turned down. So while of course you never want to use the warranty, I will give them credit because I've not seen them turn away any warranty for pretty much anything. So the warranty process seems to be pretty smooth with Gearbox overall, which is a good sign. The other issue that seems to have largely been fixed was the little dimples in the face. I asked Raphael about this. He was also aware of this, and they've put procedures in place to make sure that this is not happening anymore. Again, I'm not saying that this won't happen, but Raphael was pretty confident that most paddles should not have those dimples anymore. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it was just these really small dents inside of the face that likely happened somewhere inside of the mold with something being on top of the paddle and then just pressing into the face is my guess. Again, this one seemed to be largely cosmetic and didn't impact performance, but if you're spending $275, that shouldn't be happening. Now here's the one that's been very interesting. So there have been a lot of people saying, oh, my Gearbox is core crushed. And this is a very interesting thing to say because if you guys don't know what core crushing is, it's on polymer thermoformed paddles is where it generally happens. And if you slice one open, you can actually see that the core is literally crushed. Like you can see that the structures are bent in half. And if you press hard enough with your fingers, you can actually get it to collapse a little bit more. That doesn't exist in the Gearbox Pro Power. If you cut one of these open, pretty much the entire core is foam, along with the carbon ridges that Gearbox is known for. And I actually cut open a Gearbox CX11, which also has foam in it. I don't know how many of you might know that, but it does have foam in it. And it's a very hardened foam. It's not soft like you would think with like EVA or something like that. But yes, this paddle is largely made of foam. There is no polymer core, so there isn't really anything to crush, or at least not how most thermoformed paddles get their core crushed. But I have seen several paddles where if you take your hand and press into it, you do hear a crackling noise. Okay. And I asked Raphael about this and I said, what's going on with this? I know it's not polymer. I don't know how it impacts performance, but can you just tell me what's going on? And he basically said, this is just some foam that got hardened and now it makes a crunching noise when you press on it. And he said it has absolutely zero impact on performance. Now, whether I believe that or not, I don't really know. If I was a manufacturing company, that's probably what I would say too. But what I will say is in the conversations I have had with Raphael, he always seems very forward with me when I ask him about issues and doesn't really give me a runaround. So whether or not you want to actually believe that statement, that's up to you. That's just the information I was given. I will say it's definitely not a good look when that crackling noise is something that we have traditionally identified as bad in pickleball. I haven't seen a ton of paddles that have had this, but there have definitely been a number of them that I have seen on my Discord as well as out and about in the wild. And also when I've hit those paddles, I wouldn't necessarily say they hit any different than the paddle I have. The pitch off the face might be a little different, but I wouldn't say they hit any harder than what I have already. I don't know if this foam crackling issue has also been addressed in their production line, but that's the information I was given, so do what you want with it. So next up, let's talk about the RPMs of this paddle, because I pretty much used this paddle hard for 3 months where it was like the only paddle I used except for when I was reviewing something else. I recently retested mine and mine went from 2078 RPM to 1798 RPM, which is about a 13% drop. So this feels right about in line with what I would expect from most raw carbon fiber paddles. I don't necessarily think this is doing a lot better than other ones, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily doing worse. It's pretty much right in line with what I would expect for raw carbon fiber. As you use it, the RPMs will go down, and 3 months of heavy use in different environments, seems to be about what I'd expect. Now, really quickly, for any of you who are curious, here is the setup of my gearbox. I just have an overgrip, I have the protective edge tape, and then I have lead tape that spans both sides about here. It's probably about 4 to 5 inches of lead tape, goes right above the bottom corner and then nearly down the throat. This is the setup that I found worked best for me. In fact, when I hit my completely stock brand new gearbox that I had bought, I did find that the sweet spot was a lot smaller, which of course that's not really a surprise. I think I even mentioned that in my review, but if you are looking for a setup, this is one that I personally really liked. I know there's a lot of gearbox users who prefer it without lead, and if you're able to make it work, that's totally fine, but I did find that the sweet spot was just too subpar for me without that lead tape. So this is my setup. It weighs about 8.6 ounces. It's not terribly too heavy, definitely slower than other things I've used, but that's the setup I have. Now I just want to talk briefly about the ethics of this paddle, because I think that's another thing that was really making the rounds when this paddle came out. And I will say, since mine has pretty much hit what I consider to be fully broken in, it hits so hard. And I just don't feel like someone of my size or my skill level should be able to hit the ball as hard as I'm able to hit it with this gearbox. Anytime I pull out a different paddle and then I go to the gearbox and I drive some thirds, people will flinch at the ones from the gearbox. No one in the history of ever has ever flinched at me hitting a drive. I am not that hard of a hitter, but the gearbox is just like another level when it comes to driving the ball. Overheads, all of that, absolutely insane with this paddle. My brother, who is not afraid of me at all and has very good hands, even him, every time I hit a drive, like we actually, before this video, I went back out to hit these just so I could make sure I had all my memory right, and even he would still flinch. So it feels like I'm playing with a delaminated or core crushed paddle. Like those are the speeds that I am perceiving off of this, and when I am seeing the people react the way they are playing against it, it just doesn't feel right. Of course, this paddle is fully approved. I don't think anyone should be judged for using it. I know there's some people out there who think it's a cheater paddle or you're cheating if you use it. You know what? The paddle's approved. It's legal. You could go buy one and use it yourself if you want to. So I don't think there's anything wrong with you using it. However, I will say I notice a big difference in my ability to play the power game when I use this versus the Huarache that I'm using now. And it definitely feels a little cheap. I almost feel like I'm winning points that I don't deserve to win just because I can hit some pace that other people can't handle. And in fact, I got to play against a number of gearboxes. I played against one at Nationals, and I've played against several of them in some of my local leagues. And I will say, when I was the only one with this paddle, I was like, wow, this is so much fun. And then when other people started getting it, I was like, wow, so this is what it's like to be on the other side of this Gearbox. And it is not always a blast to be on the other side of this paddle. In fact, the first few people I played against, I was like, I just don't even know how you get out of the way. Like, all this person is going to do is blast balls at you until you screw it up or get one high enough that they can just completely put away. So it's definitely a different level or style of gameplay with the Gearbox. Whether that's good or bad, I don't really know. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the sport being at this speed, but maybe that's just where we're headed and I'll have to get used to it. All I'm going to say is that when I use this paddle, it does feel kind of cheap to me, or I feel like I'm winning things that I shouldn't be. How you want to feel about it is up to you, but that's kind of how I feel. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is this paddle actually having an issue that it wasn't intended to have? Like, is it actually having something equivalent to core corruption? And honestly, guys, I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know that there's an easy way for me to figure that out. All I know is that when one is brand new and one is completely broken in, they play very differently. The speed is absolutely insane, and there's no way to prove that something's wrong, I guess. I mean, Gearbox thinks it's intentional. USAP hasn't come in and said, hey, actually, this isn't passing deflection anymore. We need to get rid of this. So I don't know. I don't know if anything's actually wrong with it. I will say there are a lot of things that would make you lead in that direction that there's something wrong, but paddle's still here. People are still playing with it. No one has found anything that seems to point to it's actually doing something it wasn't intended to do, kind of like core corruption with thermoform paddles. So while I know it's a boring answer, I don't have a good one to give you guys. So yeah, that's pretty much my update on this paddle. I still think this is one of the best paddles in pickleball. In fact, I think it's the most fun pickleball paddle I have ever used. However, I don't know that I'll be using it anymore. And it's not really anything to do with the ethics of it or it feeling cheap. For me, it just comes back to when I play higher level people, it is very hard to use. When I'm on, it's amazing. When I'm off, it's just really bad. And I would rather have some more consistency in my game and something that I know I can rely on under heavy pressure rather than just banking on being able to blast a ball really hard over and over. I feel like in the long term, that's a little bit worse for my game. But for sure, undoubtedly, this is still a top 3 paddle on the market. There's nothing else that's like it. The biggest downside in terms of performance that I can knock against the paddle is that the sweet spot just isn't as large as other thermoformed paddles. But if you can get over that, which I think a lot of people can with some lead tape, it's incredible. I mean, it's super fun. Drives are on another level. It's a great paddle, but I won't be using it anymore, or at least for the time being, because I just need some more consistency in my game, and the Huarache, I feel like, gives me that right now. There you go. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.